This is undoubtedly the most realistic wilderness survival show to date. Only 10 items are allowed per participant. 10 individuals from different industries are dropped on Vancouver Island to fend for themselves. The last one standing wins a $500,000 prize. The first contestant, Desmond, is dropped near a river, which solves any freshwater concerns. His priority is to find a suitable campsite. Before coming here, he boasted to friends and family that he would fight a black bear if encountered. As a veteran with 7 years of service, he felt confident. However, reality struck quickly when he soon found fresh bear droppings. He found even fresher bear droppings and froze in place. The second contestant, Larry, lands with a steep slope behind him. Carrying his gear, he finds a stream on the mountain and quickly sets up a makeshift shelter with a tarp over some branches, worried about having nowhere to sleep at night. He continues deeper into the forest, battling through dense bushes and heavy rain, finally finding a decent spot. He chops down a tree, sets up a frame, covers it with a tarp, and secures the edges with stakes, deciding to make it his temporary home until he finds a better location. At 36, Mary, compared to the first two contestants, quickly finds a flat spot in the wilderness. She constructs a humanoid frame with some logs and covers it with a tarp, quickly finishing her shelter. Meanwhile, Desmond is terrified by the black bears. Everywhere he goes, he sees their tracks. Hearing low growls from a bush nearby, he becomes paranoid and unsure of what to do. So he heads back to the beach to reflect on life, and eventually decides to call and quit the show, forgetting his bold statements at the start. The fourth contestant, Tracy, aims to set up a good shelter on her first day. She uses the old method of building with trees and tarps in the forest. Tracy is lucky. The beach below is full of mussels, enough to last her 6 months. Unfortunately, due to a red tide, all shellfish are inedible, and the show's crew would not be responsible for any resulting fatalities. On the second day, after a night of heavy rain, Mary's shelter faces severe water accumulation. The collected firewood is soaked. She is forced to reinforce her shelter to make it more stable and adds an extra green tarp on the ground. This way, even if water pools at the sides, the green tarp keeps her and the water separated like a boat. She then cuts notches in 2 trees, ties a horizontal beam, covers it with a tarp, and props up a wooden stick at the front to create a kitchen specifically for cooking. This showcases her adeptness at managing daily life. The next contestant, Justin, is also a veteran. He plans to find a spot in the jungle where food is abundant, hoping to sustain himself until he wins the challenge. Mike, nearly 60 years old, is much more pragmatic. Having spent 8 years teaching pilot survival skills behind enemy lines, he is an expert in living off the land. On the beach, he finds plenty of edible seaweed, especially a type of kelp that can grow 2 feet a day. Cooked, it becomes crispy, providing an important food source for survival. After collecting the seaweed, he quickly runs to the river mouth and sets up his fishing net. On the second day, Mike starts expanding his food sources. Facing several fresh piles of bear dung by the shore, he just smiles at the camera. It's unknown how long Justin had been in the jungle before he found a small stream. Approaching, he sees a dead duck by the stream with no bite marks or blood, suspecting it died from disease. Concerned about potential infection, he struggles briefly, but decides to throw the duck into the sea to avoid attracting bears. On the 5th day, Randy, another survival instructor, enters. He has already built a shelter and started a fire, brewing a cup of hemlock tea for vitamins early in the morning. Since he often hunts in the mountains with his family, he decides to ignore the sea's resources and sets traps for rabbits and mice in the jungle, using logs as weights to create a Paiute deadfall trap, known for its sensitive trigger. The next morning, Mike sees from a distance that his fishing net has caught something. A rockfish, visible on the water's surface, can grow up to 6 inches as an adult. Pulling up the net, he also finds a flounder and a carp, marking a fruitful day. He decides to roast one to satisfy his hunger, noting it tastes dozens of times better than beef. The remaining 2 are cooked and buried in a pit 100 meters away, extending their preservation and preventing bears from stealing them. In contrast, Randy is less fortunate. His traps were triggered, but he caught nothing. However, he is relieved to know there are animals in the area. The scene shifts to Mary, who has been feeling chilly at night. She decides to construct a door for her shelter, tying a log between 2 support posts and weaving fern leaves into it. She also makes a wooden tripod for support. After finishing, She crawls into her shelter, feeling warmer and safer. The next contestant, David, has a forbidding face but is a pastor. He has solved all survival essentials except for food. Earlier on the beach, he found some ropes and decided to hang his 4 fishing hooks from them, tying one end to a tree on the shore and throwing a stone tied to the other end into the sea, wondering if it will bring him a big meal tomorrow. The next morning, he checks but is disappointed. His dream was beautiful, but reality is harsh. He caught a bunch of seaweed and lost a hook. Randy had worse luck than David as he discovered his fire starter was missing. By reviewing yesterday's footage, he saw it had rolled into the fire pit and was completely burned to ash. As a wilderness survival instructor, he felt embarrassed to go back without it. Determined, he decided to rely on starting a fire by friction. Even unluckier was Mary, who planned to chop some firewood to stoke the fire today. Unfortunately, she accidentally cut her hand with the axe, causing severe bleeding, and reluctantly chose to withdraw from the competition. The scene returns to Randy, who prepared a bow drill fire-starting kit and began his challenging journey to make fire. From 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, he finally managed to create a small spark and lit the fire. He thought about the constant need to maintain it, feeling very disheartened. The 9th contestant to appear was Nicole, who had worked with the Bushmen in Africa and had some basic survival skills. The last to appear was Joseph, who had learned many survival skills from Native Americans. He was preparing to make a bellows. He dug up some spruce roots, scraped off the bark, soaked them in water, split a log in half, hollowed it out, made a small outlet at the end to create pressure, and tied it up with spruce roots. His simple bellows worked quite well. Tracy was planning to use a net to catch fish at the beach. She had not caught anything by hand before, and remembered she had a net just as she was getting very hungry. To prevent the net from being damaged by sharp rocks on the ground, she rolled it around a branch and set it in shallow water before the tide came in. Meanwhile, Nicole, busy filling gaps in her shelter with branches, suddenly heard roaring from the beach. She walked over and saw a black bear on the opposite riverbank, very far away, so she wasn't too scared. Calmly eating sea asparagus she had gathered, she crunched it, rich in various trace elements and vitamins A, B, C, D, E, F, G. After a tide cycle, Tracy checked her net and found a crab and a fish, delighted after 7 days without meat. She cleaned them and cooked them by the fire. The fish was delicious, and the crab was incredibly fresh. Her body, starved of protein, was greatly satisfied. She thought her size could sustain her for at least 20 days. However, that evening, 2 black bears invaded Tracy's camp. She grabbed a bear deterrent whistle and blew it loudly, but the bears were undeterred. She then lit a flare and chased the mother and cub out of the camp. Safe at last, Tracy broke down in tears. As a police officer, she disliked showing her aggressive side, felt bad about using violence, and was guilty about how she had treated the bear cub. Not wanting to see her aggressive side again, she decided to call the show's producers to withdraw. 3 contestants had already withdrawn. On day 8, Mike woke up from a dream where he thought he was embracing his wife, only to find a slug on his lip, almost giving him a psychological scare. After complaining, he planned to build a drying rack at the camp using 4 branches to form a square base and 2 sticks as lock foot poles, arranging 3 different thicknesses of wood on top for drying effects when lighting a fire beneath. David hadn't had a decent meal in 7 days, with thoughts of fried chicken and burgers dominating his mind. The crab supply in the nearby rock piles was already depleted, and his set spike net had caught nothing, making him wonder how he would survive the days ahead. Meanwhile, retired veteran Justin, still in high spirits, managed to catch a ratfish with a spike net modified from a hammock, a surprising gain that could provide 30 to 40 grams of protein. Back to Mike, tired of making fires on the ground, he reinforced the 4 stakes, placed a wooden board as a platform, and covered it with pebbles to separate the fire, creating a stove perfect for boiling fish soup. Using the lever principle, he made a faucet from a plastic bottle and ropes found at the beach. Stepping on a pedal would make the bottle bend and pour out water, showcasing his knack for making things. Larry, having seen traces of bears in the forest and not wanting to face one unarmed, decided to make a spear. He cut several forks at one end, inserted a stick to widen the gap, and sharpened the tips, creating a tool that could serve as both a spear and a fish spear. Hungry David decided to make another spike net using ropes he found, breaking them into threads and making a net shuttle from cedar wood. Relying on skills taught by his fisherman father years ago, he spent 2.5 hours weaving half of a net, needing more rope to complete it. Back to Larry, who hadn't eaten meat for several days, couldn't wait for the tide to recede to check his net. He rushed to retrieve the fish for soup, but it escaped when lifted, frustrating him to the point of nearly cursing, and he struggled with whether to quit the competition. Another day passed, and female contestant Nicole, surviving on collected clams, seaweed, crabs, mushrooms, bananas, and slugs, today she finally remembered to set her spike net during the rising tide, placing the net as the water almost overflowed her rain boots, hoping for a good catch the next day. David, unable to catch any fish, relied on drinking boiled water when hungry. Cedar bark burns fast, but spruce resin burns slow and is less flammable. Mixing the two, he managed to make a fire for boiling water and accidentally drying his freshly washed socks. Just as the water was about to boil, David accidentally knocked over the pot, immediately losing his temper. Larry finally had some luck. His spike net caught a half-pound algae base. Fearing it might escape like last time, he immediately smashed the fish with 2 blows in the water. Today, his 2 spike nets brought in 4 fish in total, lifting his spirits immensely. That evening, he savored tender and flavorful fish fillets, which contained dozens of times more protein than beef. He planned to cook the leftover fish bones into a soup the next morning. Nicole, excited, went to check her spike net and suddenly saw 3 black bears across the river. Thinking a few shouts might keep them at bay, she was alarmed when the mother bear stood and looked her way, causing Nicole to run back in panic. Justin was the least focused on survival tasks. While others struggled to secure protein, he was leisurely swinging on a swing. David's bad luck continued. His spike net was empty due to a loose stake and ended up tangled. Feeling on the verge of a breakdown, he remembered his 3 children at home. Limited by his financial abilities, he had often denied their requests, feeling deeply indebted to them. Determined, he resolved to endure no matter how difficult the circumstances. After being scared by the bears, Nicole checked her spike nets again the next morning. Perhaps touched by her optimistic spirit, she caught a large 7 to 8 pound mahi-mahi. Delighted by such a protein-rich catch, she beheaded the fish right there. This catch would suffice for at least 2 days. To avoid attracting bears to her shelter, Nicole cleaned the fish by the river, gutting and filleting it efficiently. Back at camp, she fried it until golden on both sides, and after waiting 10 minutes, it was perfectly cooked. Enjoying the hot protein, she exclaimed, "Oh my God!" She also roasted the fish bones to save for dinner. Justin remained eccentric, either swinging or exercising with found trash, rarely having a full meal. David, seeing fish in the seaweed, decided to make his own fishing gear since the spike net was ineffective. Using sea snails as bait, he tried his luck at fishing. His patience paid off when he caught a rockfish after half an hour, instantly lifting his spirits. Unable to wait to catch more, David cleaned the fish and boiled it in a pot for 5 minutes, creating a delicious fish soup that he eagerly devoured. After losing his fire starter, Randy's mood finally improved. Not wanting to sit idle, he decided to renovate his shelter. Using 2 wooden stakes tied at the top and filling the gaps with chopped logs, he built an enlarged lean-to with a tarp roof. Nicole, well-fed and sensing an impending storm, used the frame to measure the door size and tied wooden boards to create a door. She filled the gaps around the shelter with branches to keep warm. Justin used a piece of split kelp to extend outside the door, allowing him to urinate from inside the cabin. When the winds calmed a bit in the afternoon, Joseph went to clean his spike net covered in seaweed, working from day to night. Eventually, he found a fish weighing about 2.5 pounds in the net, rewarding his hours of effort with a delicious stew. The next morning, after the storm had fully passed, Randy went out to check his traps. The bait in the first trap was gone, but the mechanism hadn't been triggered. The second trap, however, did not disappoint, crushing a month-old Jerry. He took it back, skinned it, cleaned the insides, and roasted it. It was his first bite of protein in over 10 days, small but significant. On day 15, Mike wandered near the camp and spotted a plastic box on the beach. Except for the removable top, the rest of the box was watertight. An ingenious idea formed in his mind. After expending energy, he brought the box back to camp, sawed 2 pieces of wood, and attached them as outriggers to the sides of the box. Once in the water, The buoyancy was enough to support Mike, and he could now cast nets in deeper waters. Meanwhile, Larry was troubled by a mouse that had gotten into his shelter, disturbing his sleep. Fortunately, his spike net still caught several fish each day, but the damp tinder was difficult to light until he dozed off around 2:30 a.m., cursing in frustration. Contestants Joseph and Mike figured that a large river in the opposite valley would have salmon spawning in large numbers. Building a boat to cross the river and cast nets there would likely lead to success. However, Joseph couldn't find a plastic box on the beach like Mike, so he had to build a boat by hand, a process full of ups and downs. Just as he was ready to install the first crossbeam, the bottom of the boat snapped. Larry, similarly troubled by the mouse, swore to level the place if it damaged his sleeping bag. The luckiest contestant was Nicole. The black bear family across the river never approached her, and her spike nets almost daily caught increasingly larger fish. She discarded the heads and cut the rest into slices that filled her frying pan, enough to sustain her for 2 days in the shelter. Larry, disturbed by a mouse in his cramped shelter, decided to pack up and relocate. He set off southward, into unexplored territory, following a creek he found in the mountains. After hours of trekking, the landscape opened up to a flat woodland bordered by a wide coast. The area, littered with plenty of dry tinder and scattered chicken of the woods mushrooms, seemed like paradise compared to before. Walking along the beach, he found a rope, perfect for building a shelter. He tied a crossbeam between 2 trees, supported the canvas with 2 mannequins, and struggled with the rope when securing the support beams due to repeatedly cutting the logs too short, which frustrated him greatly. Meanwhile, Randy, fishing with lines he set up, caught a silver shark, a species closely related to sharks millions of years ago. His luck continued with 2 successful catches, filling him but also deepening his sense of loneliness. Nicole, guarding a pot of fish stew and thinking of her late foster child, felt similarly. To combat the loneliness, Randy kept busy by reinforcing the shelter with additional support poles, improving his bed with fern leaves and a tarp, and finally, lying down in his sleeping bag, feeling extremely comfortable. By day 19 at 2:30 a.m., Justin discovered his shelter flooded, his sleeping bag soaked because he had set up in a swamp. The recent continuous rain had raised the groundwater level, turning his fire pit into a water pit, leaving him utterly distraught. He carried his sleeping bag to the kitchen at dawn, hoping to dry it with his body heat and the fire. Larry, having settled into his new home, was in high spirits surrounded by abundant chicken of the woods. However, he was uncertain about his net's catch. If he could catch some fish, the place would be perfect, but both his nets came up empty. Resigned, he cooked a meal with cap shells and mushrooms, managing a decent meal. The next morning, Larry was putting out a fire. He had made a fire under a large tree root, which had hollowed out the tree while he slept. Fortunately, the damp, rainy climate prevented a forest fire. Joseph's boat building progressed, with the gunnels and crossbeams in place. Next, he installed the ribs, choosing cedar wood, meticulously sanding it to the right dimensions. He sprinkled water on the areas needing bending and used the heat from a fire to bend them, installing over a dozen ribs in total. David had the worst luck of all. His gill net hadn't caught a single fish so far. Desperate with hunger, he relied solely on limpets for protein, though they contained very little meat. He had to eat a large quantity every day to satisfy his hunger. Eventually, David completed weaving his fishing net. To increase his chances of catching fish, he connected 2 nets together and hung lots of chunks of meat on them. He joked that if he still couldn't catch any fish, there must be something wrong with the feng shui at his home. Justin's net, initially a repurposed hammock, had also failed to catch any fish. He decided to revert it back to its original function, securing it with crossbeams and ropes at both ends. Despite the seaweed smell, sleeping on it was quite comfortable. Mike focused on his mental well-being. He crafted 2 dice from wood and used shells and stones as playing pieces, playing soccer games in his shelter and snacking on seaweed occasionally. Over the past few days, he made a bow and arrow, an alpaca trap, and used a found buoy as a bowling ball, entertaining himself on the beach. The days without worrying about food made him miss his wife at home even more, feeling that survival in the wild was just a repetition of the same tasks, which he found exceedingly dull. Consequently, Mike made a call to withdraw from the competition, proving that being lovesick is not conducive to making money. Randy, feeling a deep longing for his family, decided to build a sweat lodge to cleanse his mind and body. He arranged 8 saplings in a circle on the ground, tied the top branches together, covered it with a tarp, and placed hot stones inside. He poured water on the stones to create steam, followed by a dip in the sea after his sauna session. Eventually, he too made the call to withdraw from the competition, defeated by the loneliness. On the 22nd day of the competition, David's gill net still had caught nothing. Meanwhile, a huge spruce log washed up next to his net. Not wanting the log to damage the net, he used the tide to drag it ashore. When he returned, another log floated by, leaving him utterly speechless. Joseph's boat was almost complete, only needing its hull to be covered with a tarp. He had recently found a seal bone on the beach, which, after a long soak, became flexible enough to be fashioned into a needle, perfect for sewing the tarp onto the frame. He first broke off a piece of bone, then continuously sanded one end to make the eye of the needle, which was a quick task. Since the tarp was very thin and easily torn by rocks and barnacles, Joseph sewed several protective planks onto the bottom of the boat. Everything was ready for the trial run. On the 22nd day, to honor 22 veterans who had taken their own lives, Justin decided to climb the mountain behind his shelter. Despite several falls and knee pain, he wanted to convey a never-give-up attitude to his fellow soldiers. He braved the risks, navigated through dense, difficult bush, and conquered the steep slopes to reach the summit. After returning, feeling completely rejuvenated, he quickly dismantled his damp shelter, moved the timber to a new site, cleaned the area, set up a triangular sloped roof frame, and hung his hammock on the crossbeam, completing a deluxe watchman's hut. It was time for Nicole to check her gill net again. Undoubtedly, she caught a salmon weighing about 7 or 8 pounds. She used her hunting knife to chop off its head on the spot and cleaned the guts out. Back at camp, she cooked a full pot of it and delighted in the meal. Eating fish all day had made her a bit tired of it, so she planned to find some vegetables nearby to add vitamins to her diet. Unexpectedly, she saw a pile of freshly eaten salmon by black bears across the river. Judging by the still bright red gills, the fish was very fresh. Any other contestant would have taken it. But Nicole, seemingly unaware of how to store food, continued into the woods along the river usually occupied by those bears. She spotted several spawning fish in the river, enough to smoke and store for 10 days to half a month. However, she just looked and left, instead gathering herbs and plantain grass from the meadow to eat with her fish. Other contestants would have been envious of her resources. In stark contrast was David, whose gill net caught nothing and was tangled by the waves. Suppressing his frustration, it took him hours to untangle and restore the net. Compared to Nicole, who never worried about food, David was extremely unlucky. The next day, a yellow cedar log floated in and tore a big hole in his net. Nicole's luck continued to shine, as her gill net caught another fish, surprising everyone since she hadn't finished yesterday's fish. Confident in her net, she released the fish. On day 31, 5 contestants remained. Early in the morning, David saw a mink running past with an eel in its mouth. He tried to scare it into dropping the food, but the mink ignored him. Faced with no catch from his gill net, Larry moved into his new house a few days ago. Annoying rats began to appear nearby again. This time, he decided not to avoid them. Using conch meat as bait, he set a Paiute trap next to the camp. Killing even one rat would add some protein to his diet. Joseph spent over 10 days building a boat. Today, he finally launched his delicate lady. However, just a few meters out, the shaky boat nearly capsized. Realizing the danger, he turned back to shore. Planning to add an outrigger, he used a plastic bottle and a buoy he found earlier. Securing them to sticks, he fixed them at the stern as an outrigger. The boat was much more stable when launched again. Excited, Joseph headed toward the opposite valley, but before he could get far, the boat started leaking. Delicate Lady lived up to its name. He paddled back quickly, found a hole in the bottom, and faced the tough task of patching it up. His plan to catch migrating fish was delayed. The scene shifts to David. Waking up early, he saw a cedar log at the beach where his gill net usually was. With no fish caught in over 30 days, he had no hopes for the net. Now he planned to try using mussels as bait for crab fishing. Surprisingly, he caught one immediately. Several crabs were visible on the shallow reef. Sometimes, luck is unstoppable. One crab after another, David caught 6 within 20 minutes. He cleaned them on the spot and cooked a full pot back at camp. Finally, he enjoyed a proper feast of delicious, tender crab meat, with protein content many times that of beef. Justin, after repurposing his fishing net into a hammock, turned his attention to the conchies by the seaside. While big prey was scarce, these conchies were plentiful. In no time, he collected nearly half a basin full. Back at camp, he boiled them in water for 3 minutes. The conch meat was chewy and tasty. That evening, Larry also had a good catch. His gill net captured a half-pound rockfish. Passing by a kelp, he picked up a crab, enough to fill his stomach for the night. He was even more delighted when his Paiute trap was triggered for the first time. At that moment, his mood was incredibly joyful. Back to Justin, with plenty of conches, he was neither full nor starving. Doing the same tasks daily, he felt his wilderness survival had turned into a routine factory line. The adventure and novelty he sought were gone after surviving more than a month. Soon, the production crew's boat appeared. On day 35, Justin chose to withdraw. With his departure, only 4 contestants remained. After mastering fishing skills, David experienced a turnaround. Today, during low tide, he cast his line and caught a rockfish within 10 minutes, erasing any prior frustration. Now, full of confidence in his skills, David quickly hooked a second fish, larger than the first. He strung the fish on a rope and placed them on the rocks, planning to catch another for a hearty stew. However, when he turned to collect them, they were gone. Despite searching, there was no trace. Annoyed, David concluded a bald eagle must have stolen them. Nicole, the luckiest so far, didn't realize her misfortune was looming. A leopard seal lurked near her fishing net. When she checked the net hours later, she found only half a fish head left. She had seen a large mahi-mahi enter the net during high tide and expected a feast, only to find the seal had beaten her to it. The next day, David resumed fishing. As expected, he quickly caught 2 rockfish. Wanting to diversify his meals, he prepared 1 fish, leaving only the head and spine, planning to use it to catch crabs. However, he accidentally threw out his line coil. Attempting to retrieve it, David slipped into the cold water, soaking his lower body. At his age, he knew it wasn't worth risking hypothermia over a stable food supply. He hurried back, stripped off his pants, and warmed up in his sleeping bag. After 2 days of repairs, Joseph finally fixed the hole in his boat. On his 3rd outing with the delicate lady, he reached the opposite valley's riverside, seeing many seagulls and eagles, a good sign of fish presence. Walking upstream, he only found scattered salmon remains and no fish. Realizing he might have missed the salmon run, his mood plummeted. Larry, managing with just enough food and drink, considered how to pass the time. He picked a piece of wood and worked on it for 2.5 hours with his survival knife, crafting a decent wooden spoon. He tested it during dinner, stirring the pot of mussels and seaweed, and was pleased with the result. Since Nicole's encounter with the leopard seal, her quality of life has plummeted. Today, when checking her fishing net, she found not only that fish were stolen, but also a large hole in the net. Unsure what to do, she reluctantly moved the net upstream to avoid the seal. Although Joseph missed the salmon season, he could still go deep-sea fishing. Using methods he learned from the Inuit, he found a curved tree branch in the woods, brought it back, and worked on peeling, sanding, and polishing it. Later, he took the delicate lady out to deeper waters. After waiting for an unknown amount of time, he actually caught a large-headed fish. Despite its ugly appearance, it provided substantial energy. If fishing could always be this successful, then his efforts on the boat would not be in vain. Larry's situation now resembles Justin's before he withdrew from the competition. Every day, he does the same few things: chopping wood, starting a fire, boiling water, cooking, checking fishing nets and lines, handling the catch, drinking spruce tea at dusk while watching the sea, staring into the dark for 3 to 4 hours, and finally crawling into his sleeping bag to sleep. By the 50th day, Larry was nearly driven mad by the monotonous and isolated life, but he must continue to endure for the $500,000 prize. Nicole's luck has completely run out since the seal encounter, and her net has not caught any fish. Starving, she decides to venture into black bear territory to see if she can find any leftovers. The next day, the temperature drops suddenly, possibly indicating the approach of winter. Joseph makes a fishing reel. Once the line is set, one can just wait to collect the catch. As Joseph returns to the shore to set a second line, he spots a plastic bucket on the beach. That evening, he goes to move it to his shelter but turns it over and sees it covered in a large number of mussels. Although the crew warned that bivalves in this region might be infected due to red tide and are unsafe to eat, risking severe health issues, Joseph, driven by hunger, ignores the warnings. Today, with no catch on his lines, he gathers the mussels, cooks a full pot, and eats it all, enjoying the chewy, lip-smacking flavor, as delicious as any beef. Fortunately, the mussels were not infected, and after a night's sleep, he shows no adverse reactions. David, who suffered hunger for a month earlier, now finds a rock pool and uses his increasingly proficient fishing skills to effortlessly catch 4 crabs. He processes 2 on the spot, more than he can hold in his hands. Day 52 of the challenge. Today is Nicole's youngest son's birthday. For the first time in many years, she's missing her child's birthday. The survival days must go on. As expected, her fishing net caught nothing. Previously, she could find plantain and grass to eat nearby. Recently, due to the sudden drop in temperature, the plants have all frozen to death. She's reached the point where there is no grass to eat. Racking her brain, she thought of looking for mushrooms in the forest. Unfortunately, all she could find were either poisonous or inedible polypores. She found some horsetail, suitable only for cleaning teeth and scrubbing cookware. After searching the bushes for a long time, she found a single red berry. Without hesitation, she quickly picked and ate it. Generally, berries appear in clusters, so a single berry suggests that a black bear had been there. Nicole quickly returned to the shore and eventually resorted to cooking mussels. Boiling them in water, they could still be eaten a few times, though the energy they provided was pitifully little. At this stage of the challenge, the contestant's mental resilience is crucial. Whenever David has downtime, he misses his 3 children. To keep himself busy, he cuts some sap from a cedar tree and heats it in a shell until it melts. He then absorbs it into the soft tree bark fibers, creating a flammable tinder. This small amount is enough for David to use for half a month. Recently, Larry's condition has visibly deteriorated, not only due to the monotony and missing his family, but also due to the severe lack of food. After finally catching a rat in his trap, he says he will eat it as if licking an ice cream due to concerns about potential parasites. Day 56 of the challenge. Even the usually stable Joseph felt sentimental. The champion of the first season, Alan, won on this day. But for Joseph, in his second season of isolation in the wilderness near the sheltered bay, he can sustain himself but wonders how long he must endure before seeing his wife again. The next day at noon, the crew's speedboat appears again. Which contestant will withdraw this time? The camera focuses on Nicole. The reason is simple: food depletion and missing her family. She may not be an excellent survivalist, but she is certainly a kind woman. Day 57 of the challenge. 3 contestants remain. While beachcombing, David finds a nail, which he slightly modifies to create a weapon. Next time he sees a black bear, he won't have to flee in panic. Its main use is to pry mussels off rocks conveniently. Just aim at the edges and stab. With calm seas and good weather, David sits among the rocks and fishes. While he can't expect a catch within minutes, he never returns empty-handed when he casts his line. Today, he catches the largest rockfish since the challenge began. A real morale booster for him. After an unknown amount of time, another wild fish bites. It must be said that David has truly transformed. Previously starving, he used to eat kelp to stave off hunger, but now he manages to catch fish or crabs daily, stewing them in an iron pot by the fire. This method retains the nutrients in the fish far better than grilling. Larry, competing under the worst conditions, has set traps that haven't caught the 3 or 4 rats he hoped for in several days. Unbeknownst to him, rats avoid traps that smell of death from their own kind. His fishing net is even more disheartening, failing to catch fish and barely touching any seaweed. With winter approaching, the fish have moved to warmer, deeper waters, so his attempts at fishing day and night yield nothing. Disheartened, Larry decides to retrieve his fishing net, regretting not heeding his son's advice to exchange it for a compound bow, which could have made local seabirds and ducks a good food source. Now he must satisfy his hunger with just a few hatshell snails and periwinkles. Joseph, in better circumstances, occasionally watches the sea otters in the water to pass the time. Thanks to a pulley system he installed on his net, he can check his catch from the shore. This time, he has caught 2 Irish kings, which he cleans thoroughly and brings back to camp to stew with hat shells and seaweed, savoring every bit of the delicious meal, not wasting even the broth or bits. As a Spaniard currently unable to work in Canada, relying financially on his wife, he is eager to use the prize money to regain confidence and share his wife's burdens. Larry, from hunger, dreams of eating fried chicken even in his sleep. His mood suddenly becomes uncontrollable while chopping wood during the day. But just when you think he can't go on, he pulls himself together mentally. Despite cursing from start to finish, he refuses to quit. The scene returns to David, who, after a satisfying meal, dries his washed socks the next day, and then heads to the beach to fish. Undoubtedly, he catches another bass. He casts again, when suddenly the fish on the line escapes the hook. David dives to catch it, narrowly preventing its escape. However, whenever he has a moment to himself, he misses his children, a feeling no better than hunger. Since enjoying that pot of fish soup, Joseph's days have also become challenging. He planned to row to deeper waters to fish, but sudden strong winds and waves thwarted his plans. Forced to stay in his shelter, he eats the little remaining provisions. Once the storm passes, he plans to check his fishing net, but in his eagerness, he pulls out the stake that was anchoring the net. With the water levels high in recent days, it's impossible to go down and secure the stake again. After returning, Joseph wrapped a piece of plastic in a tarp to make a buoy. He tied the buoy and rocks to both sides of the fishing net so he could secure the net without entering the water. The next morning, aboard the Delicate, he decided to act immediately. As he narrated his determination to persevere for his wife while laying the net, the balance of the boat was disrupted by the weight of a rock and his shifting position, causing the Delicate to capsize and throw Joseph into the sea. Struggling to stand, his clothes were soaked by the icy water. To make matters worse, he wore all his warm clothes with no spare dry ones left, forcing him to press the withdrawal button. He was one of the most emotionally stable competitors, and could have rivaled the fishing expert David, if not for this mishap. Now, he exits the competition with regrets towards his wife. After suffering from hunger, Larry considered giving up, planning to burn all his firewood and eat the remaining hat shells and winkles before quitting. Perhaps a pot of stew restored some energy, reigniting his desire to win for himself and his family. He tied 4 fish hooks to his fishing line, connecting foam and rocks to both ends, and threw it into the sea to see the results. He also fixed a net on top of a rock pile, hanging some winkle meat on it to attract seabirds that might get tangled while eating. Larry felt that as long as he didn't contemplate the conditions for exit, he could last a few more weeks here. Meanwhile, David's mental defenses were weakening. The isolation was unbearable, and food was scarce. Any pause would lead to hunger. One evening, when a fish slipped off the hook, David tried to catch it but accidentally injured his knee. Such an injury might be minor for the young, but for a man over 50 and undernourished, it could lead to withdrawal. He had to rest again. Larry, having set traps in the sea, land, and air, just needed to wait at the camp for prey. Recalling his journey from initial excitement to overcoming environmental challenges and finally finding a perfect spot to survive, he was not ready to quit and waste all his efforts. On day 64, Larry was so hungry he felt nauseous. David, having stayed indoors for days, wasn't faring any better with unbearable pain in his shoulders and knees. Both clung to their last ounce of faith and reason, urging themselves to hold on a little longer. As the camera crew's speedboat entered the scene, it was clear someone had withdrawn from the competition. But who could it be? The camera shifted to Larry, who couldn't help but cry upon seeing other people again. He had exhausted his body's last reserves of energy and had no choice but to withdraw. Unaware of his victory, David continued to fish for food from the sea to feed his hungry stomach. The crew, pretending to conduct a routine medical check, questioned him. David expressed his determination to continue as long as he could rely on fish and crabs, and as long as his competitors stayed in the game. At that moment, David's daughter Erin was quietly brought in by the crew and approached him from behind. When he turned and saw her, tears immediately flowed. David's most memorable words were, "If I give up now on this chance to change my children's fate, I could never forgive myself. As long as I don't quit the competition, I'm willing to do whatever it takes." These few sentences encapsulated a father's profound love for his children. Let's congratulate David on becoming the champion of the competition.